The psychedelic revolution is here. If you want to integrate your visionary experiences into your purpose, get clear on your entrepreneurial path, and help people while you do what you love, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to The Psychedelic Entrepreneur, Medicine for These Times. I'm your host, Beth Weinstein. I'm a spiritual business coach, 3-time entrepreneur, and a lifelong student of psychedelics and sacred plant medicines. You carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times. This podcast will help you to share your medicine so you can create transformation in the world. Listen in on conversations with psychedelic leaders, changemakers, and conscious entrepreneurs who are living proof that a better world is possible when you follow your heart and live in alignment with your soul. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am so honored to be speaking with Dr. Rachel Harris today. Hi, Dr. Harris, or Rachel?
Rachel. Go by Rachel.
Rachel.
Yeah.
Great. So Dr. Rachel Harris is the author of Swimming in the Sacred, Wisdom from the Psychedelic Underground and Listening to Ayahuasca. A psychologist who has been in private practice for 40 years, she spent 10 years in academic research department where she published more than 40 scientific studies in peer-reviewed journals and received a National Institutes of Health New Investigators Award. Rachel splits her time between an island in Maine, where she is now, and the San Francisco Bay Area. And you can check out the links to her books, her website right here below this interview and here in the show notes. So, Rachel, I would love to hear your story. You know, how did you become a psychologist, find what, I believe to be maybe your soul's purpose? You know, what brought you on this path? Did you know you were on this path from a young age, or?
Yeah, that's the key. You just hit the key. If when you interview people, ask them about their childhood experiences, because that's the key for most of us. So from childhood, I had these experiences that I really valued and never talked to anybody about, which is true for most of us. As a child, even, we somehow knew that this was not something to mention. And but I was sort of following these little stepping stones of these numinous encounters that I had as a child. And searching. I was searching during adolescence for books and connections and in college, in a large university, Boston University. I somehow connected people there who knew about Esalen. And this was in the mid-'60s. So Esalen was maybe 3 years old. So when I graduated from college, I went right to Esalen into their residential program, which was a 5-month program. It was 1968. There were plenty of drugs available, good quality drugs. This is before Stan really even moved there. So it was very, very early. I was 21. And it was a 5-month program for 11 people. And we just worked in groups for 50, 60 hours a week. And we worked with all the top therapists and spiritual leaders and body workers. And we spent a week in Tassajara Zen Center, which was the very first Zen center in the continental United States. So we had lots of experiences. And then I remained on the staff, on the massage crew for a couple of years. And then when I left, there was no graduate program that would work for me. The humanistic and transpersonal programs hadn't been invented yet. So I eventually found my way into graduate programs, but not for clinical. I studied, my PhD is in research, and I was in an academic research office at the medical school at University of Miami. So that's why I have a research background. And then the clinical background really comes from those years at Esalen with all those leading therapists. So the secret is I escaped the standard doctoral training, which is mostly in cognitive therapy. So it's very behavioral. And I escaped all that. And then consequently, I had, when I did just focus on my private practice, I had a small practice of people who wanted to grow spiritually. Because they knew I came from Esalen and I had the university credentials, and so it was an elite little private practice, and that was for 40 years. So that's really the origin of the psychedelic experience.
Beautiful. And by the way, for those who don't know who you're talking about here, I mean, Esalen Institute is this kind of famous institution for the expansion of consciousness, and like you said, and when you mentioned the name Stan, I mean, I'm pretty sure I know who.
Stan Groff, right? Yes. I think he arrived in the late 70s. I'm not sure, but I had already left by then.
Okay.
Yeah,
because I was like, well, I'm pretty sure you're referring to Stan Groff.
Yes,
maybe
thank you.
Some people don't know.
And Esalen Institute is still in business. It's a growth center located in Big Sur, California, and it has been dedicated to expansion of consciousness, but it has also veered into kind of a yoga retreat center as well. So it's not quite so it was very psychologically oriented back then, and that suited me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your story, and I love it. The key is to always go back to childhood, right? We tend to make these full circles where there's this part of our childhood soul that maybe knows what we were here to do, and then somehow we're, maybe on a path back to it. Now, you mentioned that your private practice was for a lot of spiritual seekers, and it was this kind of you became known as someone who could help people with these experiences, or maybe with,
people
mystical
who wanted
experiences.
to grow. Yeah.
I'm curious, how, especially back then, how did you attract people that were so aligned with you, or assuming they were aligned with you?
That's always word of mouth. A private practice is built on word of mouth. That's how that works.
Okay.
Yeah, to find simpatico people, it's always word of mouth.
Okay.
But I also led workshops at Esalen and at Omega during mostly the 80s and 90s.
Aha.
So
Beautiful.
People knew me from being in those catalogs or from meeting me there.
Great. So let's talk about your history with psychedelics.
Well, let me just pause you a minute, because you don't know to ask the most important question. And the answer to the question is I had two mentors in my career. And one was a bodywork mentor who was really number two to Ida Rolf, who did Rolfing structure, who developed structural integration. And so I was really like a daughter to her. And so there were times when I lived with her. I mean, this was a real old-fashioned apprenticeship. My curried chicken is the same recipe as hers, 40, 50 years later. So this is what an apprenticeship looks like. But I also had a research apprenticeship at the university, and I was in a research office for a decade, and I didn't write one sentence that she didn't read. So it was a real, again, another mentorship and a real training. And I think part of the secret of these mentorships is that they were both women. So it's here's a message for the women listening, is if you can find a woman mentor, that's who to study with.
Yeah, what is it about studying under, apprenticing under a woman that you think makes it different?
They don't proposition you, generally. That's one thing.
Yeah, that's a known issue out there.
Yeah.
But besides that, was there something else?
Besides that, you're going to just shrug that off? That's a pretty big thing.
No, I'm definitely not shrugging that off.
Yeah, don't shrug it off. That's really a major thing, because for instance, I did an independent study at MIT in research, and that went very well, but a year or two later, I get a letter that's basically a proposition. So it's just never ending. So, and of course, this was in the 70s. When I guess I got that, or maybe late 60s, 69, 70, something like that. It's a constant, ongoing issue for women. So it's really a challenge to find a trustworthy mentor. But, one of the women I interviewed, here's the alternative story, is she was mentored by a Native American grandfather. And so as a psychologist, some years of therapy experience, I had to ask her, was he ever inappropriate, I think is how I whitewashed it. And she was kind of horrified that I would even ask it, because he was absolutely ethical and respectful for all the years she was in relationship with him. It was, an apprenticeship goes on for years. And those, that's a wonderful experience. I was very happy for her. That it was a safe, ethical, familial relationship.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. I mean, I definitely don't discount that these things happen. And, I have personally had many mentors and studied under people who are men and not had a problem. Meaning that not everybody, there are some actual ethical people who have their egos in check. Yeah, but we're
also a different generation, might I add. And also, when I'm saying a mentorship, I mean it is a familial relationship. I was there when my first mentor died. It's not I studied with them. I was in the family. And when my research mentor was, she died young with cancer. When she was dying and we said our goodbyes, this was my joke with her. She said, I always thought of you as a sister. Well, I always thought of her as a mother. But it was, these kinds of mentorships are familial relationships that go on for years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what do you think about, these days there's now, 6-month training programs where you can go then serve, psychedelic medicine to someone.
Yeah, and they're internet programs. It's the best we can do right now. We can't say to all the new psychedelic therapists, we have mentors for you and in 6 or 7 years you'll be ready to practice. We can't say that. So it's going to be a really different cohort of therapists. And so that's partly why these elders are so important, because, I tried to find a better way to say this, but in fact, they're a dying breed. People are not going to go back and spend all those years. So their wisdom is really valuable.
Yes, definitely the wisdom is valuable, and this is why it's important that, books like yours are being published. But also, a lot of elders that I know don't even want to, mentor anybody.
Well, isn't that interesting? People say,
what happens
how do I
then?
find a mentor? There aren't many of them. And yet, I just, one of the women I interviewed in a recent phone call said someone sent her an email, which she ignored. It was from someone she didn't know. She didn't answer it. The woman sent a second email and said how she had been working underground, and after going to, it was the presentation by the Women's Visionary Council and my presentation, they realized that they don't know as much as they thought they knew. She canceled her appointments, and she said, I would like to study with you. And that's the email that the elder answered. Because the woman took action, ethical action. So it is possible to connect with some of these elders. And I did at the MAPS conference, and generally I do refer people to the Women's Visionary Congress. There will be elders there. And it's all about a personal relationship. And I've noticed that, on some websites, or they're not academic resumes because this would never work, but people are listing, I've studied with so-and-so, but what that means is they've been in a workshop, or they took a course or an online course from someone. That's not an apprenticeship. So that's, I don't even know if it qualifies as I studied with, but there needs to be people need to understand that that's great. You did a workshop or you did one of these online training programs. That's really not enough. Do more. Find an elder. It's possible.
Yeah, and this is beautiful advice. Part of what I've run into out there just with other people and witnessing clients, and even me in my own life, is I work with people who are based in 32-hour travel time away from me in the middle of nowhere in Peru, and it's like, I have to pay my bills and live my life. And for me, I can only afford to go down there once a year. Yes, I could stop my life and just go live in the jungle for a few years, and which I believe is, if anyone's on the path to, let's say, serve ayahuasca, that is pretty much like expected. But then if it's something where, and I mean, that's what I believe in. So, but if I just want to study and, just gain wisdom, but maybe not serve ayahuasca, it's like, how do I study without giving up my entire life? It's kind of like, so the only way I've been able to pull that off is by going down there for 2 weeks every year.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is one of the issues that our society faces is, it's like people want to, let's say, invest into going to a 4-year training or getting a PhD, and then, they can't even maybe afford to pay their rent. There's kind of these realities of like,
yes,
or maybe they have kids, and so trying to juggle
that's all
life
true.
as, yeah. So what do you say to people who maybe want to get into, let's say, the underground therapy space or facilitation work, not with ayahuasca, but maybe with other medicines? Do you have any, other than like study with an elder, how do we come to terms with this kind of, this world that we're in right now, and how do people make it happen?
Well, here's when I lie awake at night worried about what's being done out there and all the crazy stories that we're just beginning to hear. Here's how I console myself. And I say, even with degrees and licensed therapists, there's a whole smorgasbord. There's a whole array of different therapists you can go to. And you have to make very good choices with therapists. I mean, some are unethical, some are abusive, some are just stupid, some are unskilled, and some are brilliant and will change your life. So, you have to it's a buyer beware market. You have to be very careful and make good selections. And I also tell people, the best referrals do not come from your family doctor. It's when you see someone doing better in their life, find out what they're doing.
Beautiful, beautiful advice. And yes, that is really true. I always say, look, like, just because someone has, a PhD and a few different degrees and maybe even studied for 15 years under, an indigenous teacher, we've all heard the stories of, unethical actions or,
I'm sorry.
Egos. Yeah. And it happens, unfortunately, all the time.
Makes me very sad. And that's all true.
But let's, I want to hear a little bit more about your personal experience with plant medicines or psychedelics that led you to write your 2 books. Did it start at Esalen, or did it start before then?
Well,
when you were,
I had psychedelic experiences at Esalen, but I was 20 something. It was the late 60s. I hardly knew how to drive a car. I mean, but I knew enough to take a spiritual approach and be out in nature. And then, I was a householder for many years. I raised a daughter who's now 40. So when my daughter was finishing graduate school, I was ready to go to a retreat, really, it was, in all honesty, I wasn't even looking for a retreat. I was looking for a beach vacation. I lived in New Jersey. It was February. I wanted to go to a beach. And so I had heard about this retreat center that was between the ocean and the rainforest. That was a great advertisement. And I didn't even really look or even recognize the retreat schedule, what it was about. I figured I can skip all that and just lie on the beach. That was my plan. And so the day before I left, this is in the Listening to Ayahuasca book, the day before I left, I get a call from the woman arranging the logistics, and she says, "Do you want to be in the ceremony?" And I said, "What ceremony?" I had no clue. Jeremy Narby was talking. I didn't recognize the name, and I didn't Google him. I was really, just looking to lie on the beach. So I said, with my background, I said yes. And so that's how I entered the ayahuasca world. And it was how this is. The first experience is often just amazing. And it was really healing. My father had died, I think, 5 or 6 years ago, and so it kind of opened that up for me. It was just really wonderful. And I wrote to all my friends and I said, I found the fountain of youth. Let's all go back next year. And that's how it started. I mean, this is, I was really a happy dilettante. And then in some ceremonies, I got a message again and again, do the research. And I thought, well, this is now 2006, 2007. And I thought, well, what a good choice ayahuasca is making. Here, I'm a therapist. I have a research background. I actually know how to do the research. And so, like a good warrior, I spent a good 3 years researching. It was a study of ayahuasca use in North America, and it got published in the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs in 2012. And that's what led to the Listening to Ayahuasca book, which, came out in 2017. So that, there's a process here that used all of me. It used the research background, it used the clinical, it used, the foundation really at Esalen, the spirit, my own spiritual life. And so that's how it got started. And because of the Listening to Ayahuasca book, I met a number of the underground women in the Bay Area. And I had also met some of the men who practiced underground. And I felt that the women, not only, my heart goes out to them, of course, for being silenced. And I talk about they're silenced in more than one way, because they're silenced as women. They're silenced because they work underground. They can't present at conferences. They're still working illegally. And, even professional women are often neglected when it comes to who's writing books and doing presentations and that sort of thing. And so I met them and they started talking to me. And part of what they said is, we have a vow of silence. We have never talked to anybody, and we will talk to you. So I was in some of the same places as they were in the late 60s. We're all over most of us are over 70, not all, but and I understood them. They're real. I call them spiritual warriors, and I'm like a spiritual wimp. So I'm not, I went to graduate school. They apprenticed with all the medicines at all dosages. I didn't do that.
I think you're a spiritual warrior. To me, you are.
Right. Well, I'm a spiritual scribe. I can do that. So I felt like I did my job. I did what I can do, and they have a very different gift and calling. It's really a calling. They're really priestesses.
Mm-hmm. So I love this because I know some of these women that are interconnected to that world, and they are just so beautiful, the work they've been doing for so long. And, like little by little, like you said, silenced underground, but, I guess within the web of the underground medicine world, it's like, some of us...
You can find them.
Yeah, and have heard interconnected stories for so long,
right.
And there's some great people doing amazing work out there, and much needed.
Yeah.
But you said something really interesting that's come up so much out there, including with me and my own personal experience about, the ayahuasca was telling you to do research, or follow the research, do the research, and we hear these stories about people saying, well, the medicine told me to do this, or the medicine told me to do that. For me, in my experience, the medicine guided me towards what I'm doing now, which I was already doing, but doing it a little different. And I actually, just let it be curious for about 3 years before I acted on it. It was over and over and over and over.
That's a great example.
But yeah, and so that's why I always say, look, just get curious. You don't have to, take action the next day. But then what do you say to the people that, we've all heard these stories. Well, the medicine told me I'm here to be a shaman, or the medicine told me to quit my job and I'm going to quit it tomorrow. What advice do you give to people that are maybe like going into medicine for the first time and then they get these like big visions where, maybe it's like not really true, or maybe it's your ego, or how do you know it's real? Like, what do you tell people?
You're really asking a question of discernment. And I can tell you, I asked the same question to the shaman I work with, and he told me what his godfather shaman told him is exactly what you described. Take your time, go back in other ceremonies and ask again and again, and see what kind of answers you get. And then I asked one of the women elders who I interviewed about the people who come up to me and say, I've done 3 ayahuasca ceremonies and I'm ready to lead ceremonies, because I'm speechless when I hear this. And she said, what the medicine is telling you is come and study, not start leading ceremonies. Start studying. Come and study. That's a very different message.
Hey everyone, just a quick break to remind you that the True Path Entrepreneur Group Mastermind Program is open for enrollment now. We start at the beginning of 2024 in January, but we are starting to take applications now. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out the Mastermind webpage on my site at bethaweinstein.com/mastermind. This is a 12-month group community-oriented mastermind program where you learn how to start, grow, and get clients in your business so that you can help more people, make a difference in the world, and do work that you absolutely love. This mastermind program is designed for new and early stage coaches, healers, psychedelic entrepreneurs, therapists, and anybody who wants to do transformational work in the world and wants to learn the exact steps you need to know to grow your business to the next level, to be able to share your unique medicine and make a difference in the world. So again, that's bethaweinstein.com/mastermind. The True Path Entrepreneur Group Business Coaching Mastermind Program is open now. Yeah, to just study, get curious, play around, be discerning. That's what I always say is, there was something in me that inherently knew, okay, ayahuasca is going to tell you a lot of things, or even mushrooms, or whatever it is. Right. And, who's to believe all of them? It's also told me like crazy things that make zero sense, that have never happened and never come true. And thank God they didn't, Mm-hmm. So, in your private practice over the years, because this happens with any mystical experience as well, people I know have had the spontaneous Kundalini awakenings, or, something come through in meditation where then, they want to go act and maybe go do something like huge. They quit their job and give away all their possessions and, quit making money and go live on a mountaintop.
Yeah.
What do you say to people about even, like, how do you know when medicine is actually giving you something of, like that's maybe real versus like your ego making it up, or that part of your monkey mind that's like looping, or, like, have you run into this before over the years?
We all have. Oh my God, this is a central question.
But then how do we know what's real and what's not? Like, how do we truly discern?
Well, there is some process of discernment. The Quakers are actually they actually have a process of discernment, and it involves other people. Well, in a Quaker meeting, there are elders in the meeting, so there's easier access to elders. And you don't just go off and do something on your own. You talk to some of the elders about it. Maybe you have, in the Quaker meetings, they have a clearance committee where you have a small group of people who help you get clear about what you think you've been called to do, so that there's actual confirmation and challenge and questioning. You don't just go do this on your own. That's part of the answer, and that's part of what I want to make clear about the women who practice underground. It seems like they're alone, but they have colleagues, they have medical doctors they can call and ask questions to. They refer to therapists who are, experienced simpatico therapists. They look like they're alone, but they're not alone. So if you've received a message to go off and do something and you're alone, something's wrong. You really want colleagues and peers. I mean, for therapists, we have peer group supervision where we talk to each other. I'm still friends with the therapist I would call when I had a question in my own practice. I was in a solo private practice, but I was never alone. I always had people I could call. So there's this bouncing off other people and also using our rational mind to check our so-called intuition that it's not inflation. I mean, my favorite sentence in my book, in the Swimming in the Sacred book, my favorite sentence is, inflation is alive and well in the psychedelic renaissance. I mean, this is really what we are dealing with. And I'll recommend Jeremy Narby's recent book. I think it's called Plant Teachers. And it's co-written. It's really an interview with a Peruvian shaman. And they talk about inflation and the ego and the problems. And there's a lot of warning signs in it. And this is why in the training of shaman, humility is a very important quality because it balances that inflation possibility.
Yeah, I want to reiterate what you said because this has come up so much in interviews, honestly, for years now. But this notion of community and healing in relation and in community, and also accountability,
Yes.
having a supervisor, whether it's an underground or above ground or a therapist. This is even in the work I do where it's like, I don't really help like people pouring ayahuasca or anything, but, coaches and healers, we all need one another to really turn to grow and expand and also hold each other accountable and bounce those ideas off of each other. Like, hey, I'm getting this intuitive idea of, taking people on a retreat next year, like, what do you think? And having people to really grow and hold you in community, which has come up so much.
Yes,
and I also agree. It's so important for, and there's, by the way, and I'm sure you know about this, there's more and more people starting to self-organize or organize these nonprofit groups in the medicine and psychedelic community that are like peer accountability.
Oh, great.
With it, like I know some medicine communities where it's the Sacred Plant Alliance where it's
Yes.
anonymous, holding each other accountable, because there's no government standard for
Right. And this is a problem for
ethics.
all of us. Yeah.
So I'm so glad you brought this up. But I want to talk about something that you mentioned. People wanting to go act on things that come through, and like a lot of people I know, especially these days, are turning to psychedelics to find a sense of purpose or meaning, or like I'm lost in life, or I feel isolated. What about people that are turning to these medicines for that, thinking, oh, I've heard on the news that psychedelics will just kind of fix my depression or fix my anxiety. What is your reaction to that? Because I think a lot of the mass media is like, oh, psychedelics will cure your depression.
Right. Yeah. What the elders have complained about recently is they get phone calls and people say, I'd like to come in for a journey because I'd like to have a mystical experience. And, this is not something that you can order up like ham and eggs. And the elders are, they're a little frustrated with this. Let's put it that way. So that's a little bit of what you're talking about. I just want to back up a minute and say, even though I don't think the online or even 1-year training programs are enough, I do think coaching and integration therapy, I think it helps to have someone who's trained and experienced as a therapist. There's something to be said for someone who's really worked in the field and then has, in addition, studied the medicines themselves and done their own healing with the medicines. And that's much more than, some of the ketamine therapists who do a ketamine training and have 1 or 2 journeys. They they might be then specialized in working with ketamine, but they're not psychedelic therapists in the broader sense. I mean, ketamine is not even a psychedelic, so they're specialized, and I think we're learning how to use ketamine. And so that's wonderful. We need people who are specialized in that because it does amazing things for depression, and we don't even know what else it does. But in general, for people working on themselves, it's helpful to have a really good therapist. And so I just want to say, I have a therapist. After all these years, lots of different therapies, I have a Jungian analyst I talk to regularly, and I tell her my dreams and other interesting experiences. And, she sort of tracks what's evolving in my unconscious, what's beginning to surface and bubble. And so it's been very helpful for me.
I have not been without therapy in the last probably 25 years of my life. I actually love it. I'm like, I don't know why people wouldn't have it.
I know. And I explained to one of the elders, they are not generally therapists. There's just one or two of them who actually had degrees. But she just assumed that all therapists had their own therapy. And when I told her this is not true, she just could not get over it.
Well, in my humble opinion, I believe especially people in service, therapists, coaches, healers, I'm holding, both of us. I hold space for so many people in their growth and their expansion and their challenges and their problems that, it's a lot of energy, and I need to really be that clear vessel to be of service in a better way. And I can't do that if I'm not processing through whatever's happening in my own personal reality, besides what's happening with my own clients. So it's kind of like, I always see my therapist, who's also someone who's psychedelic informed, who's also been serving medicine for 15 years or 20 years. Yeah, it's integration, it's therapy, it's somatic, it's also kind of, I see it as supervision for the work that I'm doing out there. So this is a really important point, and I actually believe, especially if people are going into underground work or facilitation, you always have to have, a supervisor or someone to turn to, especially if there's a challenging case that comes up. Now, Rachel, I would love to hear your take on this larger picture of the psychedelics and the medicines and what you believe the growth in popularity, especially in the last, it's been a while now, 20, 30, 40 years, but like in the last 5, 6, 7 years, it's been like exponentially growing.
Yeah.
Do you believe that there's a reason why, with all the changes happening on the planet, do you believe that psychedelics are here now for a reason? Like the ayahuasca has a message. I mean, what are your views on this? I would love to know.
Well, you might have noticed when you asked me my own views, I quote other people. My views, I think, are worthless. I mean, I'm very pessimistic. I just hope something comes and helps us because we're a mess. So you don't really want to hear my views. They're very depressing. But I have a relationship with some Peruvian, the Shipipo shaman family. And it was such a pure, with the help of a translator, it was such a pure, heartfelt statement. And it was, the plants are here to help you. And my first response was a normal, inflated Western response. Oh, the plants from the jungle are here to help me. I'm the one with a flush toilet. You don't have one. And then I realized, oh my God, we need so much help. We are in such trouble. And it was just this pure-hearted, wonderful statement from this shaman, a young man in his late 30s who was trained through his family. So he's been working for decades. The plants are here to help you. I was like, oh my God, thank you. We so much need this help. But I hope that energetic contribution doesn't get lost in the midst of our Western inflation, my momentary inflation about having a flush toilet, and the money, the entrepreneurial greed that's happening. I mean, this "we're here to help you" could easily get lost. And I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I went through the late 60s where we thought these medicines were going to change the world. Evidently, that didn't happen, right? I mean, things are even worse than we even imagined. So for me personally, I have no clue. But this is the message from the jungle, which is such a sweet, open-hearted message. So I think this is where humility and gratitude are really high qualities to nurture in ourselves. I just have to say, when I moved, I'm in Maine, and when I bought this cabin, it's really a cabin, in the late 80s, there was no running water, there was no electricity, it was filthy, there wasn't even an outhouse. This was like a shack. And in the next 10 years, they brought electricity out to this part of a remote island. And then I was able to put in a septic and a flush toilet. And so the word went out on the island. I was one of a couple of shacks that are right on a pond, it's really a lake, it's a mile-long lake. And so the word went out from the locals, this is the first flush on the pond. And people were very concerned. So that's the use of the word flush. It's such an old-fashioned word for toilet. But I lived here, I was here in the summertime. It was a retreat place for me. But I didn't have electricity for 10 years. And of course, now I've had it for 30. So I'm very comfortable. But in the beginning, I didn't have a flush. But that's what's so funny about the significance of a flush toilet. But that's a family. It's not even a retreat center. You go and you sort of move in with the family. Mm-hmm. So, we have a lot to learn in our culture, and I don't know how we're going to learn it. I just do what I know to do, what I'm called to do.
That right there is the words of wisdom right there. Do what you're called to do.
Yeah.
So let me ask about your newest book, Swimming in the Sacred. Who is this for? Who did you write it for, other than, of course, yourself, your heart, it was coming through you, but the kind of people that you think should be reading it or would really benefit from reading it? Is it written for an underground facilitator or a therapist, or who do you have in mind when you were deciding
anybody
to go
who's
do this?
interested in working with the medicines at any level? I mean, I hope the research teams read it, because they failed to contact these women. So my personal audience was the women themselves. I sent them the manuscript before I sent it to my editor, and I changed whatever they wanted me to change. But and I was really only concerned about their response. But it was in support of them. I didn't want their wisdom to be lost. I mean, that is really my intention. So anybody who is interested in this field, and here's the slightly snarky example I give, because as a researcher, I feel like I have a right to be a little snarky. And that is that Hopkins did an online survey of people. So they had like 2,000 subjects, responses. And they asked, did you ever have an encounter with an entity? All right, so this is far out research for a university research team. But had they consulted any of the women elders would have had them ask a different question. And the question would have been, do you have an ongoing relationship with the spirit of any of these plants, medicines? And then you can ask, and how do you connect with them? And this is what I asked in my research study that was published in 2012, only because I asked one of the elders. I knew her then. And I said, what should I ask in my questionnaire? And she gave me this very valuable question. Do you have an ongoing relationship? That means a relationship with the spirit of a plant or a medicine when you are not under the influence. It's an ongoing relationship. Hopkins didn't know to ask that question. It would have been a much richer research study and far more valuable.
than just asking, have you ever encountered an entity? That sounds so...
And so they got a yes or no answer.
Yeah, that doesn't even sound helpful, to be honest.
Well, how helpful is it? That's a good question.
It's like, oh my
and
God.
What does it tell us about really working with these medicines over time and in relationship to the medicines?
So important. I was interviewed for someone else's podcast yesterday, and I probably spoke about the relationship with the plants for like 20 minutes because it's, I'm like, it's not the plant, it's not the psychedelic, it's an interchangeable relationship, like us, them, like we're all connected. It's not me taking or me getting or me using, I don't even like to use that word use, but I'm also human. But I'm curious, as you as a writer and author who's done all this research over the years, what was your biggest takeaway from, or your biggest insight or epiphany from writing Swimming with the Sacred? Like what came through for you that was like a aha?
It wasn't in the writing. It was in the spending so much time with these women. And, I describe a couple of experiences of what's called a contact high. But where, without any medicines involved, I was in an altered state, and I didn't even realize. Then when the time came for me to think about driving home, I wasn't quite ready. I think all this time spent with these women, talking about these kinds of healing and personal spiritual experiences, it began to pry me loose from my Western scientific indoctrination, of cause and effect and linear time and materialism. And so I'm a lot more loose in my experience of reality than I was before. And then I think the most humbling experience I had 12 hours with two Native American women who are part of the elders. And I sat in their dining room. We grabbed a bite of lunch. We went out to dinner. I was there from like 9 to 9. And when I was getting ready to leave, they said, because we're women, they said, a woman's question, do you need to use the bathroom before you go? And I brilliantly said, I don't know. And at that point, they took charge of me because obvious I was, not quite in my right mind. If I don't know if I have to go pee or not, So they sort of took charge of me. They said, well, go to the bathroom and then we'll work on you. I went to the bathroom. I peed. I had to pee. It was an hour's drive home. I don't know what I would have done. And then after sitting 12 hours in their dining room, they opened a door that I hadn't noticed in the dining room that led to their ceremonial room with all their sacred objects and their shamanic paraphernalia. And they cleared me with eagle feathers and herbs and for like 45 minutes. And then I was able to drive home. But I would have missed that. I did miss it. They never opened that door. They never invited me in. When I needed them, of course they did, out of their own generosity of spirit. But that is such a lesson to me that we can be 8 feet away and miss something completely. And as researchers, we have to be more humble and ask for help from the people who have the most experience working with these medicines. And I wrote this book so that experience would not be lost.
Beautiful. And I also want to say, even as not just as researchers, but if all humans could just develop a little more humility, right?
Be nice. Like it would be nice.
Imagine what our world would become. You had mentioned humility earlier. When you, let's say, study with indigenous elders or go down to, like the people I work with down in the jungle in Peru, what I've experienced is if you're not humble, the plants will school you until you are humble.
That's
like
interesting.
The couple times where I've gone in with like, oh, I've done this before, it's no problem. It's like, whoosh, like there's a new lesson to be learned, and it always comes back to humility and really like, keeping it in check and remembering, okay, we are all just babies here in the grand scheme of, this universal experience being human. Like I don't think any, even the most studied, I always say like even Mother Teresa was human, like
absolutely.
We're all learning, we're all trying our best, and we're all on this journey of our soul evolving and expanding, and to really have that humility and compassion for ourselves and also one another, it's huge, especially right now. It's like we need it more than ever.
More than ever.
So Rachel, I want to hear about what you have. Well, you can talk about where to find your books, your work. I'm curious, is anything coming through for you that's next? Do you already have a book that's kind of in work? Or
I'm not ready to talk about what's next. I'm just trying to survive the PR for this book. Yeah.
Well, and I hope chill out on the island in Maine for a little while, take some vacation. Are you going around on tour for the book? I'm curious if anything.
I've done it. I've given a couple of talks, and now I have webinars that will come on. So I'm there. If you go to YouTube, you can easily find me. And the website you'll probably post it is swimminginthesacred.com. So, and I actually, I shouldn't encourage this, but I actually answer people's emails. So, of course, it takes me a while, but I do. Yeah. I mean, I really want to be responsive. I want to be responsive to people. Yeah.
I think that's really nice. I always answer people's emails as well. It sometimes takes me a week or two, but I believe, like, especially if it's quick, if we're of service, if someone's really struggling and has a quick question, or at least I, refer people out to, my list of resources of therapists.
Good.
But I really honor you for taking the time to answer people's questions, or, but I think if everybody just checks out your book, I have the website here. We'll also have the other places where you can purchase the book.
Right.
And, that's a great way to get a lot of your questions answered and learn from these amazing elders who've been doing this work for so long that's in service to the planet.
Thank you.
So, Rachel, it was so great to meet you again and have you on.
It's been fun getting to know you.
Such an honor. And I hope the weather improves out there and you can have a beautiful end of the summer and the fall where it's just so nice, so beautiful out there.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're feeling inspired, I'd appreciate it if you showed your love with a review. And check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of this podcast. You can also head to bethaweinstein.com to learn more about me and grab my free business growth trainings. Remember, you carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times.